The warning alarms on the Starlight Duchess started as a soft chime, almost lost among the gentle hum of the luxury cruise ship's normal operations. Within minutes, they grew into a screaming chorus that sent the ship's predominantly alien crew rushing to their emergency stations. Captain Reed stood on the bridge, his silvery scales reflecting the red emergency lights as he stared at the main display. His long fingers moved swiftly across the control panel. But the readings didn't change. The massive ship's engine core was failing, and they were being pulled into the gravity well of a gas giant they'd been studying from a safe distance. "Engineering report," he called out, his voice steady despite the situation. The response came through with bursts of static. "Captain, the main engine housing is cracked." The chief engineer's voice wavered. "The gravitational forces from the gas giant are stronger than we calculated. We're losing power to the stabilizers." Reed's second set of eyelids flickered, a sign of deep concern among his species. The Starlight Duchess was a state-of-the-art vessel, but it had been designed and built for Class II species, those evolved from low-gravity worlds. Most of the crew, including Reed himself, came from planets with gravity barely half that of Earth. "Can we repair it?" Reed asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it officially. "Sir," the engineer paused. "The damage is in Section 7. With the gravitational forces from the gas giant, that section is experiencing nearly twice standard gravity. None of our crew can work effectively in those conditions. Even our maintenance drones are struggling with the pressure." First Officer Blue stepped forward, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with anxiety. "Captain, we have 300 passengers aboard. If we can't stabilize our orbit—" She didn't need to finish. They all knew what would happen. The Starlight Duchess would be pulled deeper into the gas giant's gravity well until the pressure crushed the hull like an eggshell. "How long?" Reed asked. "At current degradation rates, we have maybe 48 standard hours before our orbit becomes unrecoverable." The ship's eye responded, its holographic form flickering beside the captain's chair. Reed's tail twitched, another sign of stress he couldn't quite hide. They were too far from any major space lanes for conventional help to arrive in time. The nearest rescue vessels would take at least 4 days to reach them, and they were all staffed by other Class II species who would face the same limitations. "Sir," the AI spoke again, its tone shifting. "I have been analyzing possible solutions. There is one option we haven't considered." "Go on," Reed said, watching as their orbit calculations painted an increasingly grim picture on the main screen. "We are within 18 hours of Outpost 47. They maintain a small population of Class 5 species support staff. Specifically, they have human engineers." The bridge fell silent. Blue's luminescence dimmed to almost nothing, a clear sign of fear. Even Reed felt his scales tighten against his skin at the suggestion. Humans, Deathworlders. Their very presence made most civilized species uncomfortable. They came from a high-gravity death trap of a planet, evolved as pursuit predators with terrifying endurance and strength. Their bodies could withstand pressures that would crush most species, and they seemed to thrive in conditions that others found horrifying. "A human," Blue whispered. "Captain, they're dangerous, unpredictable." Reed looked at the steadily worsening numbers on his display. The choice was becoming clear. Risk having a Deathworlder aboard, or watch his ship and everyone on it die. "AI, send the distress call to Outpost 47, he ordered. "Request immediate assistance from their human engineering staff. Mark it as critical priority." As the AI acknowledged the command, Reed could only hope he hadn't just made a terrible mistake. But as the gas giant loomed larger in their viewport, its swirling storms promising destruction, he knew they were out of options. They needed a Deathworlder. They needed a human. The docking bay of the Starlight Duchess was eerily quiet as the small repair shuttle approached. Captain Reed stood with the security team, watching through the reinforced windows as the vessel smoothly aligned with their emergency dock. First Officer Blue kept shifting her weight from one foot to another, her luminescent patches flickering with nervous energy. "Remember," Reed addressed his crew, "no sudden movements. The human may interpret them as threatening." The airlock cycled, and everyone held their breath. The inner door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a figure that made several crew members step back involuntarily. Jack Stone walked through the doorway carrying a massive toolbox like it weighed nothing. He stood nearly 2 heads taller than Captain Reed. His work suit stretched over dense muscles that spoke of evolution on a world that had tried its best to kill his species. What really unnerved the crew was how he moved. Quick, decisive movements that their instincts screamed were those of a predator. "Engineering emergency." Jack's voice was surprisingly gentle, despite his intimidating appearance. He looked around the bay, seemingly unbothered by the higher gravity that was already making the security team tired. "Got your distress call. Thanks for the quick docking clearance." Reed stepped forward, fighting his natural instinct to flee. "Yes, welcome aboard the Starlight Duchess. I'm Captain Reed. We have a critical engine failure in Section 7. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made Blue's luminescence dim to almost nothing. The human's gaze seemed to take in everything at once, analyzing, assessing. More than one crew member noticed how his pupils adjusted rapidly to the different light levels. Another predatory trait. "Show me," Jack said simply, adjusting his grip on the toolbox. As they walked through the ship's corridors, crew members pressed themselves against walls to maintain distance. Jack pretended not to notice, but his expression showed he was well aware of their fear. The gravity got progressively stronger as they approached Section 7, making Reed and Blue move more slowly and carefully. "The gravitational forces here are approaching twice standard," Blue warned, her voice strained from the effort of moving. "It's nearly impossible for our species to work in these conditions." Jack actually smiled at that, showing teeth, a gesture that made several nearby crew members flinch. "Lucky for you, I grew up in higher gravity than this. Earth's about 2.5 times your standard, and I spent 3 years working construction on Hughes Colony. That's closer to 3 times. They reached the engine room, and Jack let out a low whistle at the sight of the cracked housing. The damage was worse than the initial reports had suggested. The whole unit was warped from the gravitational stress. "Yeah, this is pretty bad," he said, already pulling tools from his box. "But I've seen worse. Going to need to cut away the damaged section and weld in reinforcements before we can even think about the actual repair." He lifted a cutting torch that would have required 2 of the alien crew members to move. "You might want to step back to the lower gravity section," he suggested kindly. "This is going to take a while. And no offense, but you all look like you're struggling just standing here." Reed nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the suggestion, even as his instincts screamed about leaving a predator unsupervised near his ship's heart. "We'll monitor from the engineering station in Section 5. Please keep communications open." "Will do," Jack said, already focusing on the task. He moved with surprising grace for such a large being, positioning himself near the damaged housing. "Oh, and Captain, try not to worry too much. I know your kind thinks we humans are dangerous, and you're not wrong. But right now, that's exactly what you need. Someone dangerous enough to fight this gravity and win." As Reed and Blue retreated to a more comfortable gravity level, they watched on the monitors as Jack began his work. The human moved with purpose and power, handling tools and equipment that would crush their own species. "Maybe," Blue said quietly, "being dangerous isn't always a bad thing." Reed watched the human working to save their ship and had to agree. Sometimes, you needed someone dangerous on your side. 3 hours into the repair work, Jack Stone found the real problem. Hidden behind the cracked engine housing was something far worse, a structural weakness that threatened to tear the entire engine apart. He wiped sweat from his forehead and keyed the comm unit. "Captain Reed, we've got a situation here." In the engineering control room, Reed and his crew watched through the monitors as Jack's camera feed showed the damage. The human's vital signs displayed on a side screen, showing elevated heart rate and temperature that would have killed most of their species. "How bad is it?" Reed asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Bad enough," Jack replied, grunting as he shifted a heavy piece of equipment. "The housing crack. That was just a symptom. The main support struts are failing. Probably been weakening for months. Your Class 2 sensors wouldn't have caught it because they're not calibrated for these stress levels." Blue stepped closer to the screen, her bioluminescence pulsing with worry. "Can it be fixed?" "Yes, but not easily." Jack's camera showed him moving deeper into the engine compartment. "I need to replace the entire support framework." "You got any heavy-duty alloy beams in storage?" "Level 3, Storage Bay 8, the ship's A responded. "But our loading drones cannot operate in the current gravity conditions." Jack laughed, a sound that still made some of the crew nervous. "No need for drones. Just give me access and I'll handle it." 20 minutes later, the engineering crew watched in amazement as Jack carried 4 massive support beams, each weighing more than an adult of their species, from the storage bay to the engine room. He moved slowly but steadily, his muscles visibly straining even through his work suit. "Impossible," whispered one of the engineers, their wing membranes fluttering in disbelief. "Those beams, even our powered loaders struggle with that weight." But Jack wasn't done surprising them. As they watched, he began cutting away the damaged framework using tools designed for mechanical assistance, wielding them with his bare hands. The physical strain would have crippled any of them, but the human seemed to draw energy from the challenge. Heart rate approaching 150 beats per minute, the AI announced. Blood pressure elevated. Recommended rest period. "Not now," Jack growled, his voice rough with effort. "We're losing orbit faster than predicted. I can rest when we're safe." Reed watched the numbers on his display. The ship's orbit was indeed degrading more quickly now. The gas giant's gravity was pulling them in, and they had less time than they'd thought. "Mr. Stone," Reed said carefully, "perhaps we should consider alternatives. Your vital signs are perfectly normal for a human under exertion." Jack interrupted, not pausing in his work. This is what we're built for, Captain. Humans evolved pushing our limits. The more impossible the task, the harder we push." As if to prove his point, Jack began welding the new support beams in place. Sparks flew around him as he worked in conditions that would have crushed most species. His movements were precise despite the enormous pressure, each weld perfect. "Fascinating," Blue murmured, watching him work. "Their physical resilience is remarkable. No wonder they colonized so many heavy gravity worlds." Hour after hour passed, and Jack kept working. The crew organized shifts to monitor him, but the human refused to take more than 5-minute breaks for water and energy bars. They watched as he rebuilt their engine support structure piece by piece, his determination seeming to grow as the task became more challenging. "You know what's funny?" Jack said during one of his brief breaks, his voice tired but amused. "On Earth, I was just an average mechanic. Nothing special. Out here, among the stars, being human makes me some kind of superhero." Reed looked at the progress displayed on his screens, progress that would have taken a full team of his species days to accomplish, assuming they could work in such conditions at all. "Perhaps," Reed replied. "That is exactly what we needed. A superhero who doesn't know he is one." During his brief rest period, Jack Stone sat in the crew's break room, humming an old Earth tune while checking his repair calculations. He didn't notice how the sound made several crew members' defensive quills rise or their sensory appendages twitch nervously. "He's making those predator sounds again," whispered a junior engineer to First Officer Blue. "And he keeps showing his teeth when he talks." Blue watched Jack from across the room. The human was indeed smiling as he worked, occasionally drumming his fingers on the table, another movement that seemed unnecessarily aggressive to their species. But she had also been watching him work for hours, seeing how carefully he handled their equipment despite his enormous strength. "Is something wrong?" Jack asked suddenly, looking up. His quick movement made two crew members jump back. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle anyone." That's when Engineer Swift entered the break room. Unlike most of the crew, the avian alien moved with a natural grace that matched Jack's. She was carrying a data pad, and to everyone's surprise, walked directly to Jack's table. "Your calculations," Swift said, placing the pad down. "They're impressive, but I think you missed something in the thermal expansion rates." Jack's eyes lit up at the technical discussion. "Show me." He moved to make space at his table, the sudden motion causing nearby crew members to flinch. But Swift stayed put, her head tilted in curiosity. "You move differently than the stories say," Swift observed, taking the seat. "They claim humans are always aggressive, always ready to attack. But you're being careful, aren't you?" Jack's smile turned softer. "We can be aggressive when we need to be, but most of us prefer not to frighten others. It's just, sometimes we forget how we appear to species that evolved differently." As they discussed the calculations, a small accident proved Swift's point. A tired crew member stumbled, knocking over a container of hot liquid. Without thinking, Jack moved with that terrifying human speed, catching both the crew member and the container before either could hit the ground. The entire room froze. Jack held perfectly still, supporting the shocked alien with one hand while the other balanced the container. Even his breathing slowed, trying to appear less threatening. "It's okay," he said softly, slowly helping the crew member regain their footing. "You're not hurt. Everything's fine." "You moved so fast," the crew member stammered. "But you didn't, you weren't. Wasn't trying to hurt you." Jack finished, carefully setting the container on a nearby table. "Of course not. Humans might be predators, but we're also protectors. It's kind of our thing." Swift watched this exchange with growing interest. "You could have crushed them with that grip. Your strength is only dangerous if I choose to make it dangerous," Jack said firmly. "Same as your talons, or the captain's venom glands, or Blue's electric defense system. We all have ways to hurt others. We all choose not to." The room fell silent as the crew considered this. Blue's bioluminescence shifted to a thoughtful pattern. She had never considered their own natural weapons in comparison to human capabilities. "Besides," Jack added, returning to his calculations, "right now we have bigger problems than species differences. The engine support structure is stabilized, but we still need to repair the main power coupling. That's going to be the real challenge." Swift leaned over to look at his work, her initial fear forgotten in the face of the technical puzzle. Other crew members, seeing her example, slowly moved closer. Jack kept his movements measured and calm, carefully explaining his repair plans. "Maybe," Blue thought, watching this impromptu engineering meeting form, "we've been looking at humans all wrong. We saw the strength, the speed, the predator instincts, but missed how they choose to use those traits." As if to prove her point, Jack reached for his water bottle, then paused mid-motion when he noticed a nervous crew member nearby. He slowed the movement, made it deliberate and careful. A predator, yes, but one who understood his own power and chose to be gentle. The cultural gap wasn't gone, but it was beginning to bridge. The ship's alarms blared to life, their urgent sound cutting through the relative calm that had settled over the crew. Jack's head snapped up from the power coupling he was working on, his body tensing at the noise. "Captain Reed." The AI's voice carried an edge of panic. "The gas giant's gravity field has intensified. Our orbit is decaying at 3 times the predicted rate." In the control room, Reed's scales paled to a sickly white. "Time to critical. At current degradation, less than 2 hours before we pass the point of no return." Jack's voice crackled over the comm. "I heard that. The internal repairs aren't enough anymore." He paused, and they could hear him breathing heavily in the high gravity. "We need to fix the external housing. Right now." External. Blue's luminescence flared with alarm. "But that would require a spacewalk in these conditions. The pressure would kill any of you instantly," Jack finished. "But I might survive it." Might is the key word here, but it's better than definitely dying when this ship gets pulled apart. Reed stared at the readings. The gas giant's swirling storms filled their viewports, beautiful and deadly. Mr. Stone, the external pressure at this distance, even for a human, is going to hurt like hell, Jack said bluntly. But my bones are dense enough to handle it. Probably. Look, we don't have time to debate this. I need a suit rated for extreme pressure, and I need it now. Swift, who had been monitoring the engineering station, spoke up. We have one emergency suit designed for gas giant research, but it's never been tested at these levels. It'll have to do. 20 minutes later, Jack stood in the airlock, wearing a suit that made him look even more massive than usual. The crew had gathered to help him prepare, their earlier fear of him forgotten in the face of what he was about to attempt. The suit's power system will help counteract some of the pressure, Swift explained, checking the seals. But you'll still be experiencing forces that... She trailed off, her wings trembling. That should turn me into paste. Jack gave that teeth-showing smile that no longer seemed to frighten them. Don't worry. Humans are stubborn. We don't die easily. The external cameras showed the repair site, now warped by the intense gravitational forces. The metal was actually bending as they watched. Around the ship, the gas giant's storms raged, creating conditions that would tear apart anything not built to withstand extreme pressure. Airlock cycling, the AI announced. External pressure approaching 4 times standard. 5 times. 6. Jack stepped out into space, and everyone watching the feeds gasped. The forces hitting him were visible in how the suit compressed, in how every movement was a struggle against invisible weight. Still alive, Jack grunted over the comm, moving to repair site. They watched as he pulled himself along the hull, fighting against pressures that would have killed most species instantly. His vitals on the monitor were alarming. Heart racing, muscles straining, blood pressure soaring. But he kept moving. The human body, Swift whispered in awe. It's not just strong. It's adaptable. They evolved to survive conditions that should be impossible. Jack reached the damage section and began working. His movements were slower now, every action costing him tremendous effort. The storm around them intensified, throwing debris against his suit. Jack, Reed called over the comm. Your vital signs are reaching critical levels. The human body can't. The human body, Jack interrupted, his voice strained but determined, can do what it has to do to survive. It's kind of our specialty. Now please, let me concentrate. They watched in tense silence as Jack battled both the physical damage and the forces trying to crush him. A true Deathworlder, fighting against death itself to save them all. The gas giant's storms raged on, but in that moment, they learned something important. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in space isn't what's trying to kill you. It's what's willing to risk death to save you. Outside the ship, surrounded by the swirling storms of the gas giant, Jack Stone faced the hardest repair of his life. Each movement was a battle against crushing pressure. His bones creaked under forces that would have turned most species to jelly. Warning, the suit's eye chimed. Structural integrity at 64% and falling. Human physiology approaching maximum tolerance. Inside the ship, the crew watched their monitors with growing horror. Jack's vital signs were far into the red zone. His heart was beating so fast it looked like it might explode. How is he still conscious? Blue asked, her luminescence barely visible from stress. He shouldn't be, Swift answered, her wings tightly folded. By all known medical science, he should have passed out minutes ago. On the external camera feed, they watched Jack's hands shake as he tried to seal the final connection. The tool slipped from his grasp, floating away into the storm. No, Jack's voice was rough, with pain and effort. Not now. Too close. Mr. Stone, Captain Reed's voice was urgent. You have to come back inside. These readings, you're dying out there. Can't. Jack's breathing was labored. Almost Almost got it. Need to finish. Then something happened that shocked the entire crew. Jack reached out with his bare hands, pushing them against the exposed parts of the engine housing. Even through the thick suit, they could see his muscles straining. "What is he doing?" Blue demanded. "The pressure will crush his hands." "Impossible," Swift whispered. "He's trying to bend the housing back into place with pure physical force." They watched in stunned silence as Jack pushed against metal that their strongest machines would struggle to move. His vitals spiked even higher, warning alerts flashing across every medical screen. Human biology entering critical failure, the ship's eye warned. Multiple systems showing severe stress. Immediate evacuation required. But Jack didn't stop. His voice came through in gasps. "Humans, we don't give up. Not when others depend on us." The metal began to move. Slowly, impossibly, it bent back into position. Blood vessels burst in Jack's eyes from the strain, but he kept pushing. "The housing. It's realigning." Swift called out, checking her readings. "Power flow is stabilizing." "Jack, Reed tried again. You've done it. You can come back now. Please." There was no response. On the camera, they could see Jack floating motionless, his hands still pressed against the now repaired housing. "He's unconscious," Blue reported, her voice shaking. "Life signs weakening." Reed's command came instantly. "Emergency recovery team to Airlock 3. Prepare medical bay for extreme gravity species treatment." The rescue took precious minutes that Jack didn't have. When they finally pulled him back inside, his suit was warped from the pressure, and his body was battered almost beyond recognition. In the medical bay, the ship's doctors worked frantically, using everything they knew about human physiology. The crew gathered outside, waiting. Even those who had initially feared him now prayed to their various deities for his survival. Hours passed. Jack's heart stopped twice. Each time, the medical team managed to restart it, amazed at how the human body fought to live even when unconscious. "His species," one doctor explained to Reed, "they're not just physically strong. Their entire biology is built around survival. They heal faster, adapt better. It's like their bodies simply refuse to die." Finally, after what seemed like forever, Jack's vital signs stabilized. His body had been pushed far beyond what should have been possible, but somehow he was still alive. Swift looked at her captain. "We were so afraid of their strength, their endurance, their predator nature. We never understood that those same traits would make them the greatest allies we could have." Reed finished. "That being dangerous doesn't mean being a threat." In the medical bay, Jack Stone lay healing, his broken body already beginning to repair itself with that impossible human resilience. He had pushed himself to the breaking point and beyond, not because he had to, but because others needed him to. The crew of the Starlight Duchess learned something important that day. Sometimes the most frightening thing in the universe could also be the most heroic. 3 days after the crisis, the Starlight Duchess cruised safely through normal space, its engine humming with a smoothness that impressed even veteran crew members. In the medical bay, Jack Stone sat up in his reinforced bed, his body still showing the marks of his impossible feat, but healing with remarkable speed. "The doctors say you shouldn't even be conscious yet," Captain Reed said, standing beside the bed. His scales had returned to their healthy silver color, let alone sitting up and talking. Jack shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Humans heal fast. It's another one of those scary Deathworlder things that's actually pretty useful." Blue and Swift entered the medical bay together, carrying what looked like official documents. The fear that had once made Blue's luminescence dim around Jack was completely gone. "We've been going over the repair records," Swift said, her wings relaxed and open. "What you did out there, it wasn't just brave. It was technically brilliant. You didn't just fix the engine. You improved it. The modifications you made under crushing pressure," Blue added, her bioluminescence glowing with admiration. They've increased our engine efficiency by 12%. How did you even think clearly enough to do that? Jack smiled, and this time no one flinched at his exposed teeth. When you're fighting against forces that want to kill you, you learn to think creatively. It's a human thing. We don't just survive, we try to improve things while we're at it. Captain Reed stepped forward formally. The passenger committee has asked to present you with a commendation. You saved 300 lives that day. But more than that, you taught us something important. Oh, Jack raised an eyebrow. What's that? That we were wrong about humans, wrong about Deathworlders. Reed's voice carried genuine emotion. We saw your strength and called it threatening. We saw your speed and called it frightening. We saw your predator nature and called it dangerous. But, Blue continued, her lights pulsing gently, we never understood that those same traits make you the best protectors in the galaxy. You're not just capable of surviving terrible conditions, you're willing to face them to save others. Swift placed a data pad on Jack's bed. The ship's engineering committee has unanimously voted to request human engineering teams for all our major vessels. We've also recommended changes to the galactic safety protocols, suggesting that all ships include at least one high-gravity species crew member. Jack looked at the pad, then back at the gathered aliens. You're not afraid we'll take over? Reed made a sound that might have been a laugh. Mr. Stone, you had every opportunity to harm us. Instead, you nearly died saving us. Perhaps the galaxy needs more beings who are dangerous enough to protect others. The passenger manifest for our next cruise, Blue added with a glow of pride, has actually increased after news of your actions spread. People feel safer knowing a human will be aboard. Not just any human, Swift corrected. Jack Stone is being requested specifically. It seems you've become something of a legend already. Jack leaned back in his bed, looking amused. A legend? For doing what any human would have done. Perhaps that's exactly why your species is so remarkable, Reed said thoughtfully. What seems impossible to others is simply human nature to you. The medical bay's window showed stars streaming past, stars they were alive to see because a Deathworlder had risked everything to save them. The ship's AI quietly noted that requests for information about human space engineering programs had increased by 300% among the crew's children. You know what's funny? Jack said, looking out at those stars. Humans always wondered if we find our place out here among the stars. Turns out, we just needed to be ourselves. Dangerous enough to protect, strong enough to help, and crazy enough to try the impossible. Reed nodded, understanding at last. They had called a Deathworlder because they were trapped and alone. They had found not just a savior, but a bridge between worlds, proof that being dangerous and being good were not opposite things, but rather two sides of the same remarkable coin. The story of the Starlight Duchess became legend in space lanes across the galaxy. The day when being trapped with a Deathworlder turned out to be the luckiest thing that could have happened to her crew.